Welcome to AINdebrief, where we take a look back at the most important aviation stories of the past week by the AIN editors who covered them. I'm AIN Alerts editor Chad Trottvetter.
This edition of AIN's Debrief podcast is sponsored by Farnborough International Airshow Connect, coming your way from the 20th to the 24th of July. This virtual program will bring 5 days of high-quality content, collaboration, thought leadership, and industry insight, connecting the global aerospace industry online. The FIA Connect program is free to attend and will include features such as webinars, downloads, and insightful information, providing support to the industry at a time when we cannot meet. Organizers are taking highlights of the Farnborough International Airshow, including the Fin sessions and the Meet the Buyer program, and they're bringing them online to you. To register for your space, visit connect.farnboroughairshow.com.
In this week's episode, senior editor Kerry Lynch gives an update on the X-59, a NASA supersonic boom X-plane demonstrator that could pave the way for supersonic flight over land. She also talks about a new partnership between Aerion Supersonic and Carbon Engineering to produce fuel from carbon dioxide extracted from the air. Staying on the alternative fuels theme, senior editor Curt Epstein explains a new ASTM process that converts trash to biofuel. And editor-in-chief Matt Thurber discusses FlightAware's new tie-up with Microsoft to provide live aircraft traffic for the latter company's new flight simulator software that will be released next year. So, Kerry, the NASA is working on the X-59 as a supersonic testbed, and they've announced some progress on that. So, can you fill us in on the details of what's going on?
Sure, Chad. NASA has teamed with Lockheed Martin to develop what they call an X-plane. It's a one-off demonstrator, and this one is called the Quiet Supersonic Technology Demonstrator. And so they let it the contract for this in April of 2018, and this thing is coming together pretty rapidly. They've already started to build the forward section, the flight deck section, and also large portions of the wing. They've put some skins on it. They've put all the stuff within the wing, if you will. And they think this airplane is going to be ready to fly by the end of 2021.
So what's the goal here? They're going to be doing low boom testing over certain cities, and what are they hoping for?
Well, that's what they're going to do. This X-plane is designed to prove that technologies and noise shapes and acoustics and everything has advanced since the development of the Concorde to the point where the noise signature is totally different than what it was with the Concorde. And they want to get the message across that nobody's trying to recreate the Concorde when you go forward with supersonic designs. And that's a huge deal because a lot of opposition and actually the whole ban on flight over land stems from how loud the Concorde was. It would create the sonic boom that's so well known now that would, be super loud on the ground and unacceptable to communities. So what they're trying to show is they can develop technologies that would create what they call a thud, not quite a boom, that's much more in line with what you hear in aircraft noise today. So going back to the X-59, it's going to demonstrate this noise signature of what technologies can do today. And once it flies, which I said earlier, it would be at the end of 2021, they're going to test it out and expand the flight envelope. And then they're going to bring it over various communities throughout the U.S. to evaluate how loud it is over communities. And they're going to survey people within those communities to gauge their reaction to see if it's something that could be acceptable. And that effort is supposed to probably kick off around 2022, 2023, early part, and continue for a few years because they want to have different representations of populations through the U.S. And they've already done some initial testing with an F-18 over, I believe, Texas to to test their survey methods to make sure they've got the right survey approach. So when they begin the trials with the X-plane, they get good and accurate data. Now, the end goal of this is to accumulate all this data and present it into ICAO. So as the international community begins to develop standards, they have this body of evidence. And I think ICAO is looking to develop some sort of proposal on supersonic aircraft in the latter part of the decade, around 2027, 2028. And so, unless they can demonstrate that supersonic flight will be quiet over land and it'll be a thud or a low boom, as they call it, rather than a sonic boom, they're going to have a hard time convincing regulators to lift the ban on supersonic flight over land, which would then make supersonic flight fairly prohibitive. And as we know, there are a number of designs underway that are very contingent on the ability to fly over land as well as over water.
Is it possible that by the beginning of the next decade, 2030, we could actually see regulations that would allow supersonic over land then, assuming that the tests go well?
It is possible, assuming that the tests go well and that they get the environmentalists on board. And, FAA has come out and said there are going to be people who are going to say, no way, no matter what you do. So they're already lining up. It is possible, and FAA is already taking steps to that goal. They've already put out a couple of rulemakings to kind of help facilitate the design and test of supersonic aircraft and certification of them. But it doesn't lift the actual ban over land. And so that's what needs to happen. And the process, they're talking about a proposal at ICAO at 2028. So it will take a few years before the whole thing is validated and signed off on various states. But with an aircraft like a supersonic aircraft, it has to be harmonized. You can't have an aircraft that flies that fast and make it stay within one country. So you really need the international community on board.
Right. Well, let's stay in the supersonic realm. This week, actually, on Wednesday, Aerion Supersonic announced a partnership with a company called Carbon Engineering to develop carbon neutral fuel. So what's that all about?
Well, this is kind of an interesting venture for Aerion because they are trying to project the image that they are very forward thinking environmentally. And Aerion, like all the other supersonic jet developers right now, recognize that they have to be that way to have their aircraft deemed acceptable within the public purview. But, and I also think there's probably a genuine sense that we have to be very responsible going forward. So having said that, Aerion has set a goal to have its aircraft not only stage 5, but run with an engine that could run fully on sustainable fuel. No engine can do that. As we've talked before, there are aromatics that are required for engines. But this engine is a new design engine, even if it is with an existing core. And so they can start looking at ways to design it so it doesn't need those aromatics. Now, having said that, Aerion is looking to partner early on in that process so they can get this fuel and establish the parameters for it in a way that it'll work with this engine. The other thing is Aerion has been very interested in direct air capture means of development of supersonic fuels. And what that is that's taking carbon right out of the air and different sources and converting it into fuel. It's taking it out of the CO2 in the air and converting it into fuel. And Tom Weiss, who spoke at the AIAA Aviation Forum a couple weeks ago now, had said that they're very interested in this pathway because with carbon dioxide, it's anywhere in the world. So you can establish a plant anywhere in the world and take it, you don't have to, you're not dependent on biomass or certain kinds of feedstock that is based in certain regions. You can set it up anywhere. Now, the big problem with that is cost. And so the hope is that this method of creation of fuel will come way down. But anyways, so going back to the latest news, they have teamed with a company that does just this, the Carbon Engineering. They're out of British Columbia, and they are taking carbon dioxide out of the air and converting it into fuel. And so they've partnered to look for ways to develop fuels for the AS2 that the AS2 could run on, but also the potential development of a plant to produce the fuel.
Continuing on the alternative fuel theme, ASTM approved a new way to make aviation fuel, right? Curt?
Yes, John, that's correct. So ASTM International is the standards body. It ensures the testing and safety of any new fuel product, and they're the ones that put the stamp of approval on any new sustainable alternative jet fuel. And with this latest approval, it brings the number of production pathways to 7. And this latest one, which was championed by Fulcrum Bioenergy and I believe Honeywell's UOP, it involved taking synthetic crude oil derived from, in the case of Fulcrum, from municipal waste. For instance, those pizza boxes that are covered in grease that you can't recycle, well, that's a prime example of materials that they could use for this process. But municipal waste, paper, textiles, things of that nature, and using the Fischer-Tropsch process, they can gasify that and eventually convert it into a petroleum-like synthetic crude oil. So this approval was taking that synthetic crude oil and being able to add it to regular crude oil in the refining of fuels. So what this in essence did was it moved the addition of the biofuel portion further upstream in the refining process.
Yet most of the fuel processes are making jet fuel right away, right?
That's correct. In most of the earlier approved processes, as you mentioned, it's making a fuel that can be then blended with existing jet fuel at the refinery gate. So basically an after product that is then cut with conventional Jet A and mixed up to certain levels. So this one's allowing the synthetic crude oil to be inserted into the process basically at any refinery where they can deliver this stuff, and it won't call for specialized production methods. It'll just be a sustainable crude oil that they'll be able to mix in at certain percentages and then go along with the refining process as normal.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so that's one thing that the industry was applauding. There was a lot of people biting on this. You had oil companies, biofuel producers, aircraft and engine manufacturers, the FAA, and they basically were kind of in the corner on this one and pushing for it. So they've granted this. And as they say, fuels made from petroleum and synthetic crude are cleaner. They obviously contribute more to the carbon life cycle reduction of the fuels. And for Fulcrum particularly, this comes as a nice push because they're constructing a big biofuel plant outside of Reno, Nevada. And what they describe as the first garbage to jet fuel plant in the world is expected to become operational later this year. And when running at full tilt, it's going to take 175,000 tons of municipal solid waste and boil that down into about 11 million gallons of synthetic crude oil a year. So,
did they say anything about what they think this will do to cost per gallon? I think that's been the prohibitive part of sustainable fuel. Is it's been multiples of 4 or 5 times of what a normal gallon would cost. Did they talk about the cost of this versus like a feedstock from like a wheat or something like that?
They didn't talk about that, but for every production pathway that's approved, obviously it opens another avenue for companies to get involved. And when you consider 11 million gallons of synthetic crude a year, I'm not sure what that cuts down to in terms of jet fuel. But when you're talking about airline usage, you're talking about millions of barrels a year, not millions of gallons, but millions of barrels. So I'm not sure if this particular project is going to make all that much difference in moving the needle. But for each one of these processes that's approved, that opens it up to other companies. And there's other companies that use this Fischer-Tropsch process. which can then develop the synthetic crude oil, which can then be used more readily in the production process. So all around, this is good news for the biofuel industry. And eventually, as these things ramp up, the object is to make a significant impact on the amount of fuel that's being used.
Right, and we have plenty of trash here too, so.
And we've got plenty of trash. If it can get rid of 175,000 tons of trash a year, more power to it. And trash is trash. Supposedly it's a feedstock that nobody wants and is good for the environment to get rid of, so it's a plus.
Excellent. Thanks, Curt. So, Matt, FlightAware this week announced a partnership with Microsoft. They're going to be providing real-time traffic for the new Microsoft Flight Simulator. So what's the plan? What are they doing?
So this is pretty interesting, Chad, for flight simulator aficionados. What this means is that when you're flying in Microsoft's new flight simulator, you'll be able to see other traffic that is based on actual real traffic that's flying around the globe. So, for example, if you take off from San Francisco, there might be a 777 in front of you before you can get to the runway, and you'll have to wait for him to take off. So at this point, you're not going to actually see the 777. You'll see a data block or something like that that indicates where that airplane is. But I don't know if server capacity grows fast enough, maybe at some point you're going to be able to see the other aircraft on the ground and in the air. It's a pretty interesting development.
So what's the advantage to the simulator user?
It's just going to make it more realistic to be able to interact with and have to deal with other traffic like you do if you're really flying. Right now, in the simulation world, you can run into other traffic, like if you're flying with Pilot Edge's real-time air traffic control, you'll see other Pilot Edge clients flying around, for example. But right now, you're pretty much out there on your own. Some simulations have some AI-generated traffic, but it's not the same thing as having to deal with wherever real traffic is out there.
Will you see other simulator users too, or just only real live traffic that's out in the real world?
No, you just see the traffic itself as kind of a data block that's got the information about the airplane. But another interesting feature is that you can jump into that virtual airplane and take it over if you want to.
Sounds like fun. And did they discuss the new flight simulator? It sounds like this is going to be pretty interesting. The graphics are much better, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. FlightAware CEO Daniel Baker's clearly very involved with Microsoft because they partnered on this, but he says the new simulator is pretty darn amazing. The resolution of the graphics is just incredible. The weather is going to look so much more realistic. The different way the light shines depending on where you are and what the weather is like out there. I've seen some previews of it, and it does look very remarkable. They're pulling out all the stops on this product.
And it's in alpha testing right now, and they're hoping to get beta test later this year, and that probably means a 2021 release then, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. And in fact, I'm trying to get hooked up so I can participate in some of the testing.
Hey, can you just go over your setup for everybody out there? What kind of simulator setup do you have? You have throttles and rudder pedals, right?
Yeah, right now I have a fairly powerful PC computer running Windows 10. I'm using X-Plane simulator right now. I have a multi-engine throttle setup, and that's from CH Products. I have the Alpha honeycomb yoke, which is a pretty good yoke, and the reason I like it is because the trim actually works pretty well. I'm using two monitors, one for the airplane and the flight instruments, and the other to run a moving map. And then I have the Thrustmaster T-Flight rudder pedals, which are pretty good because they feel fairly natural. These aren't the most expensive ones you can buy from Thrustmaster, but they're pretty good.
Okay, excellent, Matt. Thanks for updating on us on that. Thanks for listening to AINdebrief. Another podcast episode will air next Friday. In the meantime, go to www.ainonline.com for the latest aviation news from AIN.